works. They probably want some sector relevance, industry relevance to your business so they can add value, because no investor, I don't care who they are, just want to feel like money. Everybody wants to feel like they're bringing some sort of value. In fact, I would argue you shouldn't invest in a business unless you can bring value. You've got to make the value the thing that gives you the edge to make that investment work. Otherwise, you might just invest in the stock market. If you can't bring value, you might as well invest in the stock market. And I don't think you make money from the stock market. Middle class people make money from the stock market. You make money like Warren Buffett makes money. You own a piece of a company you can influence. You can help make sure it's successful. So do your research. But these are the types of profiles that are often the best. Family and friends. Now, I know family and friends can be difficult for a lot of people. A lot of people don't have family and friends with money, and I totally understand that, and I'll come to other methods, but I just want to touch on this first, because family and friends, the reason it's such a good thing to do is because they know you. You don't have to convince someone of your personality, your profile, your dedication. They will know all of that. They'll know the true you most of the time. That can be really powerful in speeding up the process of getting the money you need. Now, of course, we all know it can get messy if you take money off family and friends and you don't pay them back. So tell them the truth. They could lose all their money. That's all you need to do. You need to tell them they could lose all their money. In the wish to get investment, we sometimes go down the road of overselling it, and that's totally normal. But please be careful with this, especially with family and friends. If you tell them, you invest in my business, it could all go wrong, you can lose everything, then after that, it's up to them. But you make it clear. Don't oversell it that it's a guaranteed win. It cannot be a guaranteed win. Nothing ever is, unless you've watched all of this video, of course, there's a high chance, but you know what I mean. Please, please be careful. But I have seen it work. And often family and friends can also help you, which in the early days of any business, if that's the stage you're at, then getting help is probably more valuable than money. But I've seen it work. So do give it serious consideration. And of course, friend of a friend can also be the way to raise money. If you don't have someone in your family that's rich, maybe you've got a friend who has a family that's rich. Learn to leverage the network, because your friend recommending you to someone who's rich will be powerful. And it doesn't mean, it'll also save you time. In the VC world, which I'll talk about in a minute, getting a recommendation is the only way to get investment. They don't take applications online, despite what their websites say. I've seen it. They don't. They take it from recommendation. So start really networking. The second thing I'll say, and I've never seen anyone else talk about this when it comes to getting an investor, and that is consider the people you want to work with you in your company as potential investors. So sometimes when you're profiling the people you want in your business, you will look at it and say, right, well, I can't afford the best, so I'll get this person, right? Which is fine, I understand that. But the smart people think differently. The smart people think, who are the best? And let's say I'm building right now a competitor to LinkedIn, helpbank.com. So I think, who's number 2 at LinkedIn? I want them to come and join me. They're never going to be number 1 at LinkedIn, not for a long time, but maybe they want the chance to build their own LinkedIn and come and join me. Now, the great thing about the number 2 at LinkedIn, definitely got some money in the bank, right? Some money to invest in the business. So I can, and I've done this many times, so this isn't just a theory, but look at your team. Look at your team members as potential investors. In the platform I'm running today, helpbank.com, the people that are involved in this business have invested in this business. Callum, who's behind the camera right now, has put his own money into this business. And he's got equity because of it, and he's taken a lower salary initially. So there's all sorts of benefits to actually doing it this way. You can get your cost down. You can get the best in class involved in the business. And you can bring money in to help make the company work. And it's much better to have money from people that are actually working in the business than people externally who are asking you for a report of when they're going to get their money back. The third thing you can do, and of course this is more traditional, but it is very complex, so I'll try to explain how to go about getting this type of person in your business, but it's an angel investor. Now, you might have heard the term many times. You've probably watched rubbish shows like Dragon's Den and thought that getting an investor is the dragon or the angel sits there with all the money and you are desperately trying to get that money off them by making them see your vision. That is the wrong way to get an angel investor. The best way to get an angel investor on board, once you've identified them and done the research to find out who they are, you'll be very clear about what you're going to give them if they invest. All of that is common sense, right? I don't need to teach you that right now. Of course, you need to know how much you're going to give them and why. And I'll get into equity in a little bit later in the video, so you can try to work that bit out. But once you've established who you want as an investor and what you're willing to give them, the way to get an investor is completely the opposite to what you think. You think getting an investor is, hi, I've got a business, this is this business, would you like to invest? No. The best way to get an angel investor is not ask for money. The best way to get an angel investor is ask for help. Because you've identified the right investor, they want to feel value. If they can't bring value, they don't want to invest. And often, if you do it right, it's not like Dragon's Den. I've invested in 78 businesses. I always feel honored and lucky when I get to invest in a successful business. They do not treat me like a dragon. They do not treat me with awe. They treat me with respect. But they also identify why they've approached me, how I can bring value, and make me feel special. And ultimately, I then feel lucky to be involved in that business if they do that right. If you ask me for advice, you're more likely to get money out of me than you straight up ask me for money. Now, I'm not saying don't build ask into the process. Of course, when you do a pitch to an angel investor, you should definitely put in there you're looking for money. But the best way to put it is we're looking for money from the right people. Make it a little harder for people to get involved in your business. That's how you get an angel investor. You create FOMO, right? FOMO, you probably heard it, but in case you haven't, it's probably one of the most powerful things. Fear of missing out. You make people understand, and you do it sincerely, that if they don't invest, they're missing out. That is the key to getting an angel investor. Now, of course, treat an angel investor with respect. If you can, prepare a correct and appropriate amount of equity they're going to get, make it clear why, explain your long-term investment plans, so how they're going to dilute, because angel investors often get diluted. So if you're offering them 5%, it might sound like a lot, but if you get another investor and another investor as things go down the line, that person could end up with 1% of the company or 0.5% of the company. And remember, most angel investors will be involved in the business. So make sure you actually need them to help you. Don't just pretend that you need them. Because once you get them on board as an investor, it will go pear-shaped. So it's not just about convincing the person to get on board, it's also convincing yourself that they're the right person to have with you on this journey in the long term. Make sure you do that. Now, the fourth way of getting an investor, more traditional, VCs, venture capitalists. Now, these types of profiles often a little bit further down the line in your business model than just a startup or an idea. Most of the time, nearly all VCs, although things have changed a little bit when there was a lot of money in the market, but most VCs will genuinely want a business that's proven that needs capital to scale. So the way to get a VC on board, a couple of ways. First, you identify, have they got money? Now, what happens with a lot of VCs is they're raising funds and they're deploying funds and then they're raising funds again. And they won't necessarily tell you. They'll take a meeting with you, they might meet you and understand your business, but they won't necessarily have the funds. And they'll tell you, what we joke in the VC world is you're too tall for radio. So you go for a job interview at a radio station, they reject you in that job, and the interview rejection reason is you were too short for radio. In other words, it's bullshit. They don't tell you why. But you can find out if they're raising. You can Google them to find this out. Don't waste time approaching VCs that are raising money. They won't deploy the capital, they will waste your time. The other thing you can do, and I think it's very important, is see who they've invested in before. And there's a good chance if they've invested in a similar business to yours, it's one of two things. It's either bad news or good news for you. If it's good, then they will invest in many different companies. So for example, there was an investment company that invested in all the Uber type businesses. They invested in Uber, they invested in Lyft, they invested in all of them. They hedged their bet that one of them was going to win, they wanted to be a part of all of them to make sure that they didn't lose. Other VCs will only invest in one company in that category. So just make sure you understand that. But if it's bad news and they only invest in one company in that category, then you can go to the competitor of that VC and create a rivalry between the VC firms. I've seen it play out many times. You make them feel like, well, they've invested in Uber, but I'm Lyft and I think we're going to beat Uber. Would you like to invest in us? And it's primal, but it works. So think about, again, have they got money? Don't waste time selling to people that don't have that. See the investor companies they've invested in before, understand that. And then 3, try to get connected to a previous company that VC has invested in. It's much more powerful for you to get introduced by one of the other portfolio companies of that VC than you personally approaching that VC. So try to make connections. And it's also good due diligence, by the way. If you speak to the company that got investment from that VC, you can find out whether that VC was decent or not, because some of these VCs are awful. So you can do your due diligence, at the same time, hopefully make a relationship with a founder that can introduce you to the VC when the time is right. Now the 5th way, again, I've never seen this way explained to people before, and it's not traditional, but I have done it many, many times, and that is work with your brand partner or client to fund your growth. So I had an office in Hong Kong and a client wanted us to open up in the Middle East. And I was a bit reluctant, which is why I think I found out about this hack. So I originally said, we don't want to open up there. I think they just wanted us to open up there and then service them. And they didn't want to spend any money doing it. But because we said no and they really wanted to work with us there, they offered to pay us to open up there. So this is a hack I learned, and I will use it many, many, many more times after this, that sometimes your client who wants your service or the brand that's sponsoring you will pay for your expansion. Sometimes it's easier for them to do that than go out and build it themselves, for example, or work with a new partner that doesn't understand their philosophy. So your existing clients can be your investor. And it can be really powerful if you do it right too, because that client then feels invested in your success. They're not going to make you go for a tender every year. They're not going to chop and change you as a client or partner or supplier, because they want you to succeed because they own equity in you. Now, of course, you have to do this carefully. So for example, if one of your clients is a bank, and they invest in you, it can get very messy suddenly on the legal side. Equally, if you are working with a particular provider, let's say in my case, I work with lots of different online service providers, but I'm partnered with GoDaddy. But if GoDaddy invested in my business, it means all the other online suppliers probably wouldn't work with me, which would not help the people I'm trying to help, which is people starting businesses. So I think it's quite important to make sure you get the right client or the right brand to invest in you, but it can be huge money. And brands do have investment divisions. Google Ventures, Google it, ironic. They invest in businesses. They invested in a coffee shop called Blue Bottle, a coffee shop. So it's possible to get Google to invest in your business, but you have to understand, again, the motives. Go back to my sales point I made in the video, earlier in the video. If you want to understand how to sell to these brands, use that sales system again. But ultimately, it's a way to raise money. Now, there's one final way I want to quickly flush out with you to raise money to make your business work. Now, it kind of touched on what I said at the beginning of this part of the video, and that is make sure you need an investor. Sometimes when people are asking me for money, I will ask them what they're using the money for. And most of the time, not always, but quite often, it's to get more sales, to grow the product, to make sure more people can buy the product and so on. But when I dig in, it's not money from me that they need. They just need a better sales system. So often when it comes to raising money, you'll find that if you can actually go look at your business and you might say to yourself, well, I need the money to buy the product. Well, you can do crowdfunding, for example. You can find methods of selling your product ahead of time through platforms like Indiegogo and platforms that will pre-sell your product to get you the revenue you need in advance. And you're not giving away any equity when you do that. You can pre-sell your product on certain crowdfunding sites before it's made. And then you can go and use the money you got from that pre-order to go and make it. And that is often a much better way than raising money from an investor. Of course, crowdfunding is quite big across the board now. You can raise money crowdfunding. You can do equity crowdfunding, and there's plenty of sites that do that. I'll put some links down below in the video if you want to check out who they are. But ultimately, you want to figure out whether or not you really need the money from a customer pre-buying it, or from an investor who's going to help bring value, or from a community that's going to support you in the future. You can do crowdfunding where you sell your product. You can do crowdfunding where you sell equity. You can do crowdfunding where ultimately it's just a loan. You can do crowdfunding where people just support you, like GoFundMe. Crowdfunding is definitely one of the ways I think today you should leverage before going to the more traditional routes of, say, a VC or an angel, or of course, family and friends. So crowdfunding is powerful, and don't overlook it. I'm going to put the links to all the different types of crowdfunding sites down below. Go check them out and let me know if you have any questions on this subject, because it is a complicated one. I will do a video in the future about how to launch a proper crowdfunding site, but that's not now. How to get a sponsor. This is something I get asked all the time. I'm going to give you the code. I'm going to give you the cheat code, I guess, on how to do it. And I want to first of all say, if any sponsors are listening to this, I have applied this technique on you, so forgive me. The first is understanding why sponsorship deals happen. We can get into what sponsorship deals structures are, and that's quite complex in itself, but I want to give you the tool today to get a sponsor on board. And the way to understand a sponsor, there's two things that makes a sponsor come on board. One is value return, right? What they invest in sponsoring you, they get back in some form, right? Be that in views or be that in sales, they get value back, ideally trackable value. So billboard companies, which I think are a joke, really in what they value-wise give back to a brand, sell because they show how many people walk past that billboard, how many people are looking at that billboard each day. And brands love that stuff. So proper ROI on their investment. The second way, and this one's a bit more tricky, but very powerful if you get it right, is the emotional sale, right? So you see this quite a lot in like local football clubs in England. Big brands sometimes are sponsoring small local football clubs. Why? Because the CEO plays football there, or the CEO grew up there playing football. Basically, the emotional sale. Now, I have used both of these to get deals, and both of them can actually work together. They're not mutually exclusive. Frankly, sometimes the emotional sale with the value return is probably the holy grail. If you can make it personal for the brand and the people running the brand, don't overlook them. If you're going to make it emotional for the person who runs the brand, alongside bring proper value, most of the time you can get a brand deal. Now, where people fall over is not structuring value for a sponsor, or, and this is probably the third thing I highlight that's important to get a sponsorship deal, you've not understood the brand. Now, I have made this mistake many times. I launched a business called Coaster Ads, and it was brilliant marketing. I took all the bars in Hong Kong and I put ads on coasters. I took out the Carlsberg coasters and the Heineken coasters and I put in coasters with ads on them. And it was brilliant because you put your drink down on that coaster, you up and down, look at it for an hour at least as you're putting the drink on it and picking it up. It was brilliant retention, brilliant engagement. People saw the ads every time. They're brilliant. But I tried to sell that service, that coaster ad service, to a jewelry business. And of course, they laughed at me. In fact, I lost them as a client on the agency side because they thought I didn't understand their brand. I was so sure that that jewelry brand would get traction, which they would have done, but I didn't remember what their brand philosophy was. And they're high end, they're fashionable, they don't want a beer sat on top of them. I made a mistake. I didn't understand the brand. And this is where you need to get really, really clear. What is the brand value? And so in that case, in the jewelry case, they want to sponsor, 007 movies with James Bond's girlfriend wearing the jewelry and looking sexy. They want to be involved in things that are not linked to beer, that are not linked to somebody drunk putting their beer down on their brand. Now, I did eventually sell coaster ads out to airlines that wanted to promote going from Hong Kong to Singapore and so on and so forth. So I eventually did really well with that brand. But initially I learned an important lesson. Understand the brand. Understand what their values are. Understand how they traditionally advertise. So Visa, for example. Visa advertise at the Olympics. They not only sponsor the Olympics, then they spend a lot of money promoting the fact that they're at the Olympics. Too many people go to Visa and ask for sponsorship without understanding that probably the biggest activation that Visa ever do is the Olympics. So you're better off going and selling some value linked to the Olympics, as opposed to saying, please sponsor my event, because they're saying, we sponsor the Olympics. We sponsor the biggest event in the world. Now you want us to sponsor your event? Brand values and understanding what that brand wants is key. But I mentioned it briefly a second ago, but I want to highlight it is important. Don't forget the people in these brands. Research who they are. Understand what their motives are. Some of the brands that sponsor me today, GoDaddy and Thai Banking, the people that run those brands care as much about entrepreneurs as the brands themselves. So when they see that me and my team are helping people, genuinely helping people have a better life, not only do the people buy in to becoming a sponsor for us, the brand alignment is there and it happens. Right now, this does tie into the emotional sale somewhat because, for example, one of the people I work with, GoDaddy, had a small business. She knew how hard it was to make that business work. So when she sees what we're doing alongside what GoDaddy does, and this isn't a sponsored video, by the way, but I'm just highlighting the example so you learn. Ultimately, these people make a difference in that brand. That brand is made up of people. So as long as those people don't get fired for sponsoring something that has no relevance to their brand, you can actually end up having champions inside these companies for you to help you get the sponsorship. And I've had that many, many times. Now, the fifth way to get a brand to sponsor you that no one talks about, I don't know why, maybe it's some sort of industry dirty secret, but it's a very, very powerful way of getting a brand sponsor on board, is work with someone that's already working with one of these brands. An agent is often one way to describe it, but there are two types of typical agents that brands work with. There is a media buying company. This is a company that will go out and buy all the ad space for that brand. They're paid by the brand to go and get the best deals possible and buy up ad space. You can talk to these media buyers, and often it can be better to talk to them than go direct to the brand, because the brand is too busy with its day-to-day to deal with you as a media owner. They would prefer to deal with the media buyer, one contact, and then that media buyer will deal with everybody that wants to sell media. So recently someone came to me and said they've got a fleet of vans and they want to get brands to advertise on their vans. And they tried going direct to brands and brands said no. I gave them a contact and the media buyer said great, and they bought all the inventory. It's much quicker. The media buyer has a relationship with the brands and often they hold the money. The brand's already allocated the money to the media buyer. So stop trying to sell to the brand, sell to the media buyer. The other way to do it is via the agencies. So I used to own an agency. It's one of the reasons I know this subject so well. But a brand will have a company that will come up with a campaign idea for them. Now, often when you're coming up with a campaign for a brand, you're also looking at how the campaign will be applied in the real world. So it might go on taxis, it might go on a bus, it might go on a coaster. So you can actually tap into these agencies. Examples without showing any preference, there's people like MC Saatchi, Ogilvy, Leo Burnett. These agencies already have the relationship with the company. And if you get in there with your idea or your product, they can often insert it or even come up with a campaign to sell it into the brand for you. Now, I personally prefer to deal with brands direct many times, but do not neglect media buyers are your friends and agencies can be your friends, and it can be a much quicker sell to get them on board as a sponsor. One of the best hacks to get a brand as a sponsor is to be personally really vested in that brand. So, for example, we recently, as you know, I mentioned it earlier, put a doorbell on the bottom of our staircase that people could press that doorbell, pitch their dream, and we would help them. We decided the best product for us to do that, the most economical product that worked on the internet, was Ring Doorbell, owned by Amazon. Now, we didn't ask Ring to sponsor us. We didn't ask Amazon to sponsor us. It was just the best product. We believed in the product and suited what we were trying to do. So we installed it and we marketed it. And of course, guess who's seen it? Ring and Amazon. So now, who are we now working with? Amazon. Now, of course, what I'm talking about here is just using the brand in your life and therefore it being a natural fit for the brand to work with you. When I wear Whoop out in the street, it's natural I'm wearing it because I like the product, and then Whoop will see me with millions of views in my videos wearing a Whoop and they will contact me. So I think that just leaning in to a brand relationship and not initially thinking about the money. Back to some of the points I was making in some of the other areas earlier, delayed gratification in sponsorship can also be very powerful. Just work with brands that you love will always be easier than forcing a brand into your ecosystem, but also just doing stuff with that brand as part of your day-to-day business life can lead to sponsorship. How to build a brand. Now, this subject is complex and exciting. If you get it right, a lot of the things I talked about earlier, like sales and marketing, will happen naturally. But it is complex. Now, there's lots of videos out there about what is a brand, so I'm not going to bore you with that. It's obvious. It's ultimately a statement about what you are doing. You want people to look at it and know. I love the images. I've seen many. You can take away the logo, you can take away everything, and you still know it's that brand. It's not about the actual logo, the design. Branding is about the purpose of the business, the essence of what you're doing. Nike is about supporting athletes. Apple is about supporting creativity. Ultimately, when you're coming to figure out your own brand, I would start with your personal brand because it's a really good way of figuring out how to build a brand. Why? You know you, right? If you're honest about yourself, you can make a brand persona. And you start with writing down your values. What do you care about? What are your non-negotiables? What will you say no to? What will you say yes to? Understanding your personality, understanding what it is you want to do, that's what your brand is about. That's who you are. Now, you will already have a personal brand, and anyone that doesn't want a personal brand, I'm sorry, you're gonna have one no matter what. People will talk about you when you're not in the room. You need to embrace personal branding. And by understanding how others perceive you, it can literally change the trajectory of your life. Now, I have some real gripes with personal brand, and it's not very scalable. Only in certain exceptions around people like Kardashians and so on, can you actually scale a personal brand. As someone that's built a personal brand, as someone that's got 4 million followers, that spent 4 years building a personal brand here in the UK, I can tell you it is sometimes a pain in the ass. I am responsible now, no matter what, to do videos like this and post up stuff even when I'm tired. Like now, I'm actually tired and I still have to do this video because if I don't do it, you probably won't take it seriously. I could give this knowledge to my colleague and give it to you and you probably wouldn't listen. So you need to hear it from someone that's been there and done it, like me. And I understand that. And I actually do love doing these videos and helping you. But I'm just trying to highlight the personal brand side is dangerous if that's all you build. You have to take personal brand seriously. You have to identify what your personal brand is. And by the way, I know people that have made their personal brand not being on social media. Their personal brand is they don't get back to you in email. That's actually sometimes what makes them unique. That's their personal brand. I don't reply to DMs. I want to make videos like this that bring you value. I want to do lives. That means I interact in a real world with real people. I have my rules. I have my values. I'm dyslexic, so I don't like reading DMs. But having those rules and having that discipline will ultimately help you define what people say about you instead of people saying it without you having defined it. But brand values of your own can teach you how you need to do exactly the same for your company name. So let's take my brand, HelpBank. Right, HelpBank has a lot of the traits that I personally value. Honesty, openness, authenticity, value. These are all words in my personal brand persona that I have translated into my company persona. However, HelpBank's long-term future also involves helping people with finance. Finance is not a word I use on my personal brand, and also supporting people to get the funding they need is something I have personally done many, many times, but as an organization, as a platform, it's going to be a much more serious thing for HelpBank. So when the branding was designed, we said it has to look a little bit more serious than the Simon Squibb brand, because ultimately we'll be funding people's dreams at scale, and people need to trust if we tell them we're going to fund their dreams, it's actually going to happen. So the HelpBank branding is a combination of the Simon Squibb branding and our competitors potentially in the future. We want to make it look serious. It has some element of fun, but ultimately it has its own brand persona. And all you need to do initially to get the brand right is write down all the different brand values. Now, I want to teach you about how companies apply brand at scale. And there's a few different ways it generally plays out. So let's take a brand like Canon. Canon run a brand method which we call reference, right? And reference is when they leverage someone else's brand to make their brand look good. So Canon, for example, worked with a photographer called Peter McKinnon, who is a brilliant photographer. I'm a big fan of his. And by sponsoring him, by supporting him, they don't need that person as a CEO in their company like Apple have done. They have it external. Nike also do this. I mentioned it earlier. Nike will sponsor top performing athletes with nice personalities that have values, and that therefore becomes part of the Nike brand. So they use this reference model to make their own brand look good. Now, Apple, as I mentioned earlier, they use a different method. I call this the leadership method. And the leadership method is basically where you have a person in the company that represents the brand values. Now, in HelpBank, I am that person. Probably in your business, you are, if you're a small business owner, the person that is the leadership value brand ambassador for your company. You're probably the one that asked to go on stage and talk about your business. You're the one in sales meetings, whatever your business model is, you're probably the one representing the brand. Of course, your staff will represent the brand. Your office environment will represent the brand. Like I said earlier, the days when you go out, have a party and post on your social media will represent your brand. But when it comes to making your brand values clear, you do it by these two methods. You either have a reference model, which means you sponsor certain people that represent your brand value, or you have a leadership model, which is you personally in the company leading the charge to make sure people understand your brand. And I think when it comes to brand building, there are some risks in both of these models. Now, in the reference model, if a celebrity that's supporting your brand does something bad, that can affect your brand. Now, this happens a lot, and they often get fired quick. I think one of the most famous cases, Kanye West, who of course got dropped by Adidas, and then lawsuits galore. But what I'm saying is, though, what's good about the reference model is you don't have to spend 4 years building up social media presence like me. I've spent every single day for 4 years doing a post, building up a community. You can just leverage all of that hard work and your brand can have the halo effect of working with me. But the downside is, what if I do something bad? Then your brand is at risk. So you need to have mechanisms in place to make sure you're protected as a brand, but that's how you scale brand. And of course, the leadership model also has its weaknesses. We all saw this a little bit with Steve Jobs. When Steve Jobs left Apple, Apple had a real problem for a long time. They put so much of their brand value in the Steve Jobs brand that when he left, the magic left, was often what people said, right? So you have to make sure that you as a leader, it's sustainable for you to be that leader and lead that brand effort, and or there's a good transition model in place. And again, when Steve Jobs went back to Apple, he did have a strong transition model with Tim Cook. Now, Tim Cook's an interesting one because he's not Steve Jobs, of course, but he is Mr. Data. He's someone you trust with your data, right? They've picked him in part because he looks trustworthy. He talks in a very trustworthy and transparent way. And in Apple's process of building a brand, today that is more important to them than a maverick leader telling you about a brilliant product. In fact, the Apple iPhone hasn't changed much since Steve Jobs died. But the point I'm trying to make here is, if you want a brand to be successful, you've got to pick one of these two strategies. Now, you can do both, of course, but you probably double the risk of having some problem in your business. And whichever path you choose, make sure you think it through right to the end. Have the ability to cut that influencer out of your business if anything goes wrong. And equally, if you're running the leadership model, make sure that that leader has a transition plan, because at some point, we're all going to die. Now, hopefully, we're all going to live forever. With Elon Musk's help, I'm sure that's true. But I will tell you now, the final thing, really important in brand, learn to say no. If you don't say no to the wrong relationships, the wrong brand partnerships, the wrong clients, your brand will get damaged. I have had this experience myself. I spent 10 years building up a brand. It had a fantastic reputation. And then I got a bad client that didn't understand how the world worked and made my brand shit with their big mouth and their lies. And this can be hugely damaging. We all have probably heard the saying, you can spend 30 years building a reputation, it only takes 5 seconds for it to go to shit. I tell you from experience that saying no to things is powerful. If you have an inkling, spider senses that someone isn't good or a brand isn't good or they don't match with your morals, do not take their money, say no. Your brand is the most valuable asset you will ever build. My company got sold for a lot of money in the end because I had a good brand image. I had a good brand value. They told me they bought the brand, not the business. Build a brand, not a business. And I promise you that brand will live forever. Next up, how to hire, how to grow, and how to build. These 3 things are interlinked. And if you get this formula right, your business can take off and forever give you the income you need, be a brand you love, and ultimately not be a management nightmare that a lot of people have when they build a business. So first of all, how to hire. I always tell people, if your business has a purpose and the people you hire believe in that purpose, you will never have to manage anybody. You will be managing purpose, not people. One of the big things people complain to me about is managing people. And often when I look at their business to see why, because they have not installed a purpose in their business that resonates with the people they have hired. And sometimes some businesses later install a purpose, but then that purpose just becomes a slogan on the wall because the people they hired in the early days weren't hired around purpose. You have to have this at the center of it all. And when you hire someone, always check, do they genuinely care about that purpose? Some people will pay you lip service to get the job. So there is a few hacks that you can do to make sure that person really cares. First of all, go check out their social media. Go see what that person really cares about. You will see it. If they care about the planet, if you see them driving around in some gas-guzzling car, they probably don't care about the environment. So actually doing your research on your hires, being careful about the people you bring into your purpose matters. Check their history. Check for references. I don't know why people don't do this. People don't ask for references anymore. I don't know why. Now I know in England it's illegal to give someone a bad reference, but if you ask right, I don't want people to have a bad employee in their life if I had that bad employee in mine. It's important that we share these things to help that employee get better. If they had a bad reference, they'd act better, they'd do a better job. Now ultimately, I think when hiring people, the key is give them equity. Now I'm going to talk more about equity a little bit later in the video. It always comes up. But if you give your team equity, they are aligned with your success. Now, any owner of any business knows that the real value in a company is not its turnover, it's in its brand. And if over 10 years an employee helps make that brand grow, but are only taking an income, they're never getting their true value. You have to own equity in the business that you are working in. Now, there's many different ways to do it. So if you're working for someone today, of course, you can go ask for equity in that company. You've got nothing to lose. They'll probably laugh. They might say no. I promise you they'll respect you more, especially if they're a founder. The second thing is you can build a business where you work with that company, but you own equity in it. So you can start your own company, but have equity in that company and then work for that person. Now, the point I'm telling you here is that give your employees respect. If you want to keep people and you want them to be motivated, have this conversation openly. Talk about this subject. You should be saying they should have equity. Now, it might not be possible to give people equity straight away. It might not be something you feel comfortable with doing straight away. But I promise you, your turnover will be less, your stress will be less, your company will be stronger if that person in your company has equity. And most people don't have the guts to do it. And they then spend years stressing they can't find anyone or that they can't find anyone that actually cares. It's because they don't own what you own. Give them a piece of the business and you'll have loyalty. Of course, it comes with its risks. But in my opinion, high turnover, high management, high stress is a bigger risk than any equity problem you could have if someone leaves, for example. And ironically, most of the time, why would people leave if they have equity? In fact, I had a case recently, someone who worked with me for 4 years. I gave them equity in the business and then they left. But because I treated them with respect and because I treated them well and we had a good relationship, when they left, they let me buy their equity back at a very low rate. They were very reasonable. They did not hold me blackmail. Now, of course, if you've hired the right person under purpose and you've given them equity, most good people will not hold you over it to get that equity back. You can be reasonable, but if you've done the right thing in the beginning by giving people equity, it's so easy. Now, the third thing I'll tell you, and this really links to how you grow your business. You can't grow a business without people. I would say that today with AI and all this technology, you'll be able to grow a business with less people, but you won't be able to grow a business with no people. So you need to grow a business through growing its culture. You need to make sure that this business has values. I had a business called Fluid. This business went on to become one of the most successful creative agencies in Asia. I sold to PricewaterhouseCoopers for more money than I'll ever need. And one of the things I did in the early days of that business, which was a big mistake, is I built a business to make money. Now that might not sound like a mistake, but what happened? First year, I hired people, they were new, it was exciting. Second year, people started to leave. Why did they leave? Because the values of the business were wrong. I changed the values in that business. We went from a business that was designed to make money to a business that would protect the staff from bad clients. I had a creative agency. Often designers were treated badly. Do this by tomorrow at 12, I need it, instead of understanding that creativity is a process. So we switched our whole model. And instead of working for clients, we worked for the creative people and helped them manage clients. That transformed our business and helped us grow. By thinking about things differently instead of traditionally, you will grow your business. And by looking after your people, it's cheesy, I know, you can grow much easier. Now, when you grow, assuming you follow my advice and you grow your business, this is the important thing you need to identify. What is your destination? What are you actually growing for? Now, I have a lot of people recently approach me and say, please invest in my business, Simon, I want to grow it. My first question is why? What is it you're trying to do by growing your business? What's the real reason you're growing your business? Is it ego? Do you really want to work more? Or is it you want to make the business bigger so you can bring in management so you can not have to work so hard? So you're working hard now to grow it, that's fine. I think you need a reason to grow it. Now, I want to grow the biggest platform in the world that helps people for free learn business. So I want it to be big. I know my destination. I want to help 10 million people for free start a business they love and never feel alone doing it. So I know my destination. And therefore I'm growing, both from a higher point of view, from a culture point of view, in that direction. But I have had points in my life, and the early days are fluid, where actually I wanted to work 3 days a week, doing cool stuff with brands, and 2 days a week, going to the beach with my girlfriend, having fun. And so I didn't grow the business too much at the beginning. I actually had a different ambition, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if you want to grow your business, brilliant. Follow this formula. Have purpose, bring people in that have value and own value in the business, and you will grow if you look after them and your customer base. The final thing I'll talk about when it comes to really building a business and making a business successful. First of all, take risk. Make sure that you build MVPs, minimum viable products. Try things out. If you really want to build a company, you can't stay stagnant. No company today is around when they stay stagnant. Think about Blockbusters or any of these businesses that just sat on their technology like Kodak and didn't do anything with it. You can't sit still. Kodak invented the digital camera. You can't sit still. You have to put these things to the market. Kodak didn't want to put their digital camera into the market because it would have meant film was gone, and film was their core business. You've got to disrupt yourself if you really want to build a business that's going to last. If you really want to build a successful company, I'm going to use a dirty word, a word that I personally hate but has saved me. You need to build systems. You need to move from what is often in the early days of a business, what I call a generalist mindset, where everybody can do